Okay, everyone can see my screen? All right, so let's take a second to kind of walk through an example here and just working with Yolanda to kind of show her how we can use the Chrome developer tools to style some of these things. So let me go ahead and pull up this example that we have. Here we have an example that's using HTML and CSS, and it's combining the concepts that we just discussed about Flexbox. All right, so why don't we go ahead and just examine the behavior of this site. Like we discussed in last week's session, we have the Chrome developer tools. These Chrome developer tools will allow us to look at our content from varying perspectives. So we can use this phone screen here to change our view. We can even look at our content as a different computer. We see that it responds very well. Let's go ahead and click on this action button here. And we want to find a way to change the elements in here. Let's find something on here. All right. So we can click on this, and we see that it has this, a set of padding on here. It has a border radius. It has a button. We can change the position of this element simply by clicking on the padding, and we have our relative root element units, right? So I can use this to make this into a relatively large button. Make this into about a 10 by 10. Now what we'll see is as we adjust the screen, that button will adjust with it as well in the sizing. So this is the difference between a relative unit, and then we can change this to pixels. And this is actually changing because our font size is relative, so let's change it to pix. Well, we can make it a little bigger than that, 10 pix. Yeah, I'll make it bigger than that. 32 pix. So everything's fixed, and that button won't change on the screen, so it stays consistent. All right, let's go ahead and examine another aspect of the Chrome developer tools. So if we click in here and we hit Command or Control F, so that opens up a search. So the specific things we've been talking about have been Flexbox. So we go ahead and search for Flex. All right, here we go. Here's our class Flex. Right. This is using display Flex, and if we click on the selector, right, this is showing us that we're looking at the navigation over here on the right panel. Why don't we go ahead and just disable Flex here and see what happens. So this class, d-flex, is being used in more than one spot. It's also being used in this container. When I hover over this, I can see it's being used here. So if we change anything on this class, what we learned is that the class selector is general to our HTML page, right? Whenever we change this, it's going to affect everything. So why don't we make our nav a little bit more specific here? We'll go to our style sheet. Okay. We'll find the d.flex, and we'll specify class d.flex. And we want to use our direct child. So we'll go back here and we'll find a div. We'll go a div, and then li. and we'll make the background color green, and we'll make it blue. We'll save that. So now we're focusing on this, right? Now we can modify this and turn off our flex, and it doesn't affect the content inside of that container. That's the value of using that direct child selector, right? Now any change that we make to the class that's associated with this nav is specific to that nav, right? We can see it would go div, the class, and then the element. So why don't we add a border, and we'll make that into a rounded. Let's see what sort of options do we have, because we can autocomplete this, right? So get rid of that, and then I'll do border, black, and round, and I'll save that, and I'll go back. All right. So this is saying, this is important, right? Something's wrong with this, so I want to change this to round, and then black. Still coming back without, the correct value here. So we just ran into this issue. The reason behind using those flashcards is to help you familiarize yourself with how to set those values, right? So you can think on your feet. If you can't do it, then that's just it's about how much you actually use that aspect of development. So you can always go to W3C, and we can find an example. We want to go. The specific thing we want to search for is CSS Border Property values. This takes us to the border property, right? And this is the thing that we're running into. Right, we want to change that to pixels. So 5 pixels, solid, and red. That'd be really clear for us to see. All right, so here's our border. We can change this to round, save that, come back. Yeah, that's not really looking so good, so let's try something. Let's see what sort of options we have available here. So let's go to border style. Got dotted, solid, dotted. Let's go to solid, dashed. See what this comes back with. We'll just keep it solid.
When you're making changes in the Google Chrome, does it save it in your HTML and your CSS, or do you have to go in and make those changes?
That's a good question. So if you're using Live Server, that's one of the extensions that we talked about, where it just automatically saves it. In this case, I'm saving the file in Visual Studio Code, and then I'm going back over to the browser and hitting refresh to show the changes.
Okay.
So I'm manually modifying the change here.
Okay.
So I want to add a rounded border here, so I'm going to change this to 1ch, and when we're working on a site, if any of you guys use Photoshop tools, one of the easiest ways to modify a photograph is to copy pieces of the picture and then put it on top of the picture, right? So you can take that sort of idea and get colors from our site and try to apply them to our border. We can add a complementary sort of color by using this green background that we have here. Right, this is medium sea green. That's what it says. So we'll change the background of this to be medium sea green. So save that. And this white could be a specific value of white. Turns out it's just void. So you save that. Come back. All right. These are really close to each other. So let's see, how can we add some spacing in between these? See what happens when we turn up flex and then spacing. Try border spacing. Okay. Yeah, let's click on this button here. We want to get the class that we're using. So we can try and add a margin. And we'll try 10 pixels. There we go. We want to go back to our sheet, and then we'll add our margin. 10 pixels. Now what happens if I adjust the screen here? Let's see. Okay, so I adjust the screen, spacing's okay, but we see that this kind of like wraps around. So let's go back here and then we'll do flex, no wrap. And refresh.
Oh, dang it.
All right, we want to do flex wrap. No wrap. Okay, so we're stuck in this container. This is using that div.flex. Let's also apply the flex no wrap to the div.flex. That's fixing this div down here. Still getting these buttons kind of stuck here. So as we go into this debugger, okay, let me go up to the nav, heading, UL. So we're limited by the space of the UL. We go up to this class for the heading. This is encapsulating all of the items here. And our nav is encapsulating that. So we move this down. Yeah, that is limiting that. So let's see what our nav. Let's go ahead and try and apply that to the nav. And we'll do flex wrap. No wrap. Still getting stuck here. So let's see. We'll count. What else can we do here? Right, no wrap. Let's move that position fixed. And let's remove all these classes and see how this adjusts. Okay. So let's see what this is stuck at. So I'm just going through and just turning off all of the things on that nav to see what's affecting it. Yeah. So this is kind of designed to not really bend. As far as styling goes, we've created buttons that kind of have a little bit of feel to them. There's another way to style a nav, so we can have what's called a hamburger menu, and we'll get into that later in the class. A better way to style navigation is to create something that's collapsible. right? That's kind of the issue that we're running into. But even when we look at a phone, these are still kind of visible, right? Refresh that, yeah. So lose a little bit here, but overall. So who wants to show what they've made?
I'll go.
Okay.
I did have I think I had only like 2, but I was working on the header and home, and it didn't come out right because I had the table. So actually, it's in the process of moving everything up. I just haven't saved any of it. I did add. Oh, wait a minute. Can y'all see my screen?
We can't.
Yes. No.
Mm-mm.
Okay. So here's my code. I added a table in mine, uh, and I was in the process of adding the flex with the home and about me and contact, but it didn't fit correctly because of the tables were affecting it. But I did add links for uh, the locations. So,
Okay.
and I had another one to change to, let me close this, to change to white when I hovered over it. And that opened in a new page. Well, something went wrong there.
Okay.
Uh,
I like that. That's really exciting. So let's go back to your page there, and let's see. So where could we apply a flex box here? Why don't we just go ahead and experiment? So if you grab that blue box there, which is a column,
mhm.
we can just use the Chrome developer tools. And this is one way to just kind of get started. This is a fingertip feel of developing something. So if you click an element style, and you type display, and then flex, so something changed. There we go. So what this is doing, we scroll up and we look at the top level for this class being used. The element that we're on right now is the column, the ID left, and it's going to apply flex to everything inside of that div. So your H3, your paragraph, all that stuff, all that content is going to get the div flex applied to it. So maybe this isn't the best place. We can go ahead and remove that. All you have to do is uncheck it. Then you can go up to the table element all over the top.
Oh, to the top, table.
There you go. We can put display flex on this. Okay. So now everything inside of the table is going to get that flex. Now if we adjust the screen here,
Oh, the screen. Okay. No, I close this.
Yeah, so you can use the Chrome developer tools, and you can change the screen to a different element. You can change the screen to a different sort of environment, like a phone. Yeah, we can change it to. So now everything in there is just adjusting to that table. So it all fits in one screen, whereas before it was getting kind of cut off every time.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I would do the same thing for the other column.
What it's going to do is it's going to apply the display flex to everything inside of that table. So now you have a flexible table that fits on that page, whereas before it was getting chopped off. If you click on the table at the top, display flex, and then you uncheck it. Yeah. Yep, this was getting cut off, but it looks like, yeah, so, yeah. All right, so I'll ping on a page. So let's keep that flex class on there. I'm sorry, the flex value for that property. And
You said flex property?
Yep, we can keep that, and then we can choose to do flex, no wrap. I'm sorry, flex no wrap, and then we can flex no wrap. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Right there. That's flex wrap.
I don't see it. Oh, flex wrap. No wrap.
And then we
Okay.
can do no wrap. Okay. All right. So I mean, it's really not having an effect. It might just be the classes that are being used in there. If we, yeah, if you click on any of those elements, it might have a sort of fixed value in there. So let's see what the class for text align left. If you click on the first column, and we so the display set for table cell. Okay. I mean, this is showing everything in content. You know, maybe a good example to build off of is the one that we looked at in the slides where we had a bunch of number tiles and you could add spacing. So that example isn't using a table. If we go back to it, pull that up here. So I recommend having a background color to identify what you're doing, like we just saw with the buttons. And then after you identify what you're modifying, you can just start to change it. So in this case, we have a div with a set of divs. This isn't using a table. If you want to show a set of items in a flexible box, you can just use a bunch of divs. And they'll squeeze with the page if we use flex no wrap. And then they'll scroll into their own individual boxes if we use flex wrap. So that could be kind of an interesting dynamic. Does anyone else have something you want to show?
I can.
Okay.
So I didn't work on anything that I was like already working on because I want to take my time with that, but I put this together. it doesn't, shoot. It doesn't do well with the phones, but I was just playing with it to see. But here's my code. I used so my link, there's an echo and it's driving me crazy. My links in the nav I did the direct child of one right there, and then I used the first child for the header one to make those centered. I just kind of was messing around. So.
Okay. Right. So where do you see areas where you want to make this page responsive?
The biggest was when I went to. I just need to play with the sizes a little bit. I want to make it so that, because when I try to go down into like the phone, this is so tiny, and also ignore the background. It would be nice to be able to have that size up. I don't know exactly how I would do that, but so that you could still, actually use that. And also this is bleeding over there. I just didn't think about it in terms of mobile kind of first. I was mostly looking at this view of it. So.
That's a good point. So if you adjust your window, we can kind of start to see how.
I mean, it works pretty well. Like I said, ignore the background or just grab something quick. But
so maybe one thing that you can put in is a fixed size for that, right?
Or a minimum,
Yeah.
a minimum width would work, or a fixed height for the nav bar, possibly. So
Yeah.
that's it.
Okay. Nice. Thank you for sharing that. Cool. All right. Anyone else?
Yeah, I guess I can show mine. I mean, it's not at all impressive, and there's a lot of errors. But I was just mostly just focused on the properties and just getting that visible. So let's share screen, and it's my developer tools. Well, yeah, this looks all messed up now because I was playing with it just now. What did I do? All right, so that's my CSS, and I use the first child. I also use the right after. I use target. I tried to use the M child. That wasn't working out too well, and hover. So let me see if I can go back and try to fix it. Let's just see if that worked. Because I tried to use the Flexbox and then it ended up. I was going to use the Flexbox on these buttons down here, and I think it's not really working that well there. But I need to tweak it a little bit. But let's see if I can.
Are you using the example that we went off of in class?
Oh, like the nav bar and everything like that?
The example we looked at for the flex box from W3C, where we have a div and then we have a flex where we have no wrap at first, right? We can see how they squeeze together, and then we have wrap where they adjust.
Yeah. I mean, I tried to just make one up, so
Okay.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I can go back and try that, but this is what I came up with. So
Right.
I was just working on trying to make sure that that was. I don't know if it. Yeah, at least that part works. So
Do you feel like you have a good starting point, a good structure to start adding Flexbox?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I definitely do. I feel good about it.
Nice. All right.
All right. I'm going to drop it.
Okay.
Share mine. One thing I could do is this on mobile just wouldn't hide these additional buttons. I can't get the background to go all the way down for the most part.
Okay. Interesting. Wow, this is really flexible here. It's very responsive. So for the background, if you go to that class, CSS, so background color, background repeat, and their repeat, and there's the image URL. Okay. So it looks like we need to scale the background.
Maybe this.
Okay, so you're using a height of 125 vertical width. Did you try changing it in Chrome Developer Tools to see how you could increase and decrease the size?
Yeah, I was having difficulties with that.
Okay. So you're there, and then you go to Styles. Go back to your HTML in Visual Studio Code. Let's find where, okay, it's being applied on the body. So if you go back to your code in the browser, the specific HTML element that we want to cover is body. Yep. And then if you scroll down in the debugger, you can drag up that window where it has styles to the bottom right.
Bottom right.
Yep. In the developer tools, there's styles, compute it, layout, event listeners, DOM breakpoints. Yeah. And if you drag that window up, there should be some options for changing the style.
Am I doing that right?
Let me go ahead and change my display here real quick.
I can't hear you, so I don't know what you're saying.
Here you go. Yep, you got it. Oh, yeah. Nice. All right. So if you scroll down, you should see the class being applied to the body if you click on the body element itself. Yep. Yeah, so if you click on the body element, there you go. You can click on that number. And then if you use the arrow keys, you can increase and decrease those units without having to change your code. You just press up and down arrows if you hover over that. Yep. There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
It's 174.
Now you can take that specific number and put it there.
Then it keeps going, right?
Yep. Nice. Yeah, good start on that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's do a quick recap of what we covered so far. Right. So before I go through this, who can tell me what we've covered in this class? What has been like the primary topics that we've discussed so far?
Are you talking about just today?
Mhm.
Advanced CSS to include how to make your web design more responsive, or how to make responsive web designs.
Mhm.
You say CS3?
Yep. So what specific selectors, can someone tell me 3 selectors that we use? Someone give me 3 advanced selectors that we use.
Direct child,
Mm-hmm.
first, what was it? Hover, I saw that. First child,
Right, yeah.
and
Thank you. So you have first child, direct child, hover, second child, and what would be a good analogy for using the first child selector? How can we describe what the first child selector does to a web page?
it designs the first element in a container.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's what it does specifically. We can imagine it. Let's say that we have a web page, right? And here's an analogy. You have a bunch of content, and you want to apply the first child selector, right? We could make first child selectors like the black keys in a piano, right? And the second child selector, yeah, the first child selector would be the white keys. The second child selector would be the black keys, right? It goes back and forth like that. We can use a formula. Those are going to be used pretty frequently in CSS, right? There's a lot of interesting patterns if you get into the UI, UX sort of space, which is a great area to get started in web development. There's a lot of demand for that, and it allows you to be extremely creative. So understanding what those values are for those properties is good. And one way to do that is to kind of work through that sort of process of memorization for 30 minutes, just kind of going through and be like, oh, I know what these things do. And then you're able to come up with those on the fly. And then if you have that information, it really just comes down to using the developer tools to pick and choose what you want to apply, right? Most of those are autocomplete. So you kind of know the word, kind of know how to get started. Really, it comes down to just using the developer tools to start putting something together. Yep. So we covered media queries, relative units. advanced selectors, pseudo selectors, and advanced pseudo selectors. So we have responsive design, right? What is responsive design? It's creating something for a phone or a tablet or something that has a not so typical display, right? It's a way for us to automatically resize, hide, shrink, and enlarge a website to make it look good on every device, right? Why is this important? Our goal is designed for a phone first. The days of creating an application for a desktop are pretty limited. No one's really doing that anymore. It's pretty much everything on the phone, all right? Why is this important? Well, we want to have fluid widths. We want to use media queries to conditionally apply our styles. So in case someone's on an Android or we have a max width, like the case that Riley brought up, like we want to be able to have some sort of condition that we're applying these styles. Those are the difference between relative units and absolute units. And we went through our sprint review. So as we move forward in the class, we're going to eventually want to start to learn how to use these tools for doing development. We covered these concepts. We're not necessarily done, right? We're just scratching the surface of what we can actually do with these pieces of web development. All right. Our media queries are a popular technique for delivering a tailored style sheet to desktops, laptops, and mobile phones. We covered max width, min width, and the and keyword. And the and keyword combines a media feature with a media type or the media feature. If we go to the example that we looked at in class, when the width of this document is 600 pixels or less, the background color is light blue. So depending on the size of the screen, we can change the color. And this works for anything. Any sort of CSS style that you want to apply, you can apply conditionally using the at media. We have units that are relative to the parent element, and then units that are relative to the root element. We discussed the viewport width and the viewport height and the difference between those. So viewport width will stretch horizontally, and viewport height will stretch vertically. Each of them uses 100 slices from left to right, and 100 slices from top to bottom for viewport height. The advanced selectors that we covered were the direct child, so the element selectors used to select elements of the specific parent. The directly after selector is used to select an element that is directly after another specific element. We also learned how we can select by attribute. So any HTML element that we create with an attribute can be styled based on its attribute. All we have to do is use the input height text or input href or input. You wouldn't have an href on an input, but you'd have about an input type equals password, or a href equals a link to a specific site that is important that we can style by attribute. When we looked at the first child, the first child selector is used to select a specified selector only if it is the first child of its parent. And we have the last child, and the last child selector matches every element that is last of its child and parent. And we have the nth child selector, which matches every element that is an nth child regardless of type of its parent. We can use a number, we can use n, we can use a formula, and we can use the keywords even and odd for our selectors. The hover selector is used to select elements when you mouse over them, and the focus selector is used to select elements that has focus. So when we hover over an element, we can change the style. If we click on a text box, we can change the style. We can also style an element based on if the user clicked a link, and we can also style an element based on whether the user has checked a box or not. We also looked at in-range and out-of-range. So the in-range selector selects all elements with a value that is within a specified range. And the in-range selector only works for input elements with min and or max attributes. And so they have to have those attributes. And then for out of range, the out of range selector selects all elements with a value that is outside of a specified range. The out of range selector only works for input elements with min or max attributes again. We also look at invalid and valid. So specifically in the case of typing an email into text box, if it's invalid, we can style it so that the user knows that their email has been entered incorrectly. And then we have valid. If we use the valid selector, we can apply the opposite behavior. Hey, your email looks good, right? It's valid. Just depends on how you want to do it. And then we look at after and before. So in after and before, we can apply content before or after content. And to do that, we use the content property. In the content property, we can set with a specific value to apply either before or after an element. And we discussed positioning. So the concept of absolute position versus relative. Absolute position is fixed, it stays there. Relative is relative to position. So an absolute position element has no position ancestors. It uses the document body and moves along the page with scrolling. And then the z-index property specifies the stack order of an element. So we can think of that as in three-dimensional space, moving in and out, right? If we want to put an element behind the element, we can use a negative index. If we want to put it in front of the element, we can use a positive index. So the z-index only works on position elements. This is important piece of information. And then if two position elements overlap with a z-index specified, the element position last in the HTML code will be shown on top. Then we covered disabled and enabled. So this is usually used on form elements. There's a possibility that you have a form element that you don't want the user to modify. So that's going to have a disabled attribute on it, right? And the disabled selector matches every disabled element, right? You have a form, and there's a fixed value that should not be modified. So you have a disabled attribute on it. And then we can style that based on that attribute. Then we discussed Flexbox. Just a real quick cap. Before Flexbox, there were 4 layout modules: block, inline, table, and position. The flexible box layout module makes it easier to design flexible, responsive layout structure without using float or position. In this example, we saw how we can use no wrap and wrap to squeeze these boxes together and distribute them if we don't want them to wrap them. We covered the concept of flex container, flex items. This is how our box is designed. We have our main axis. The main axis is defined by the flex direction property, and the cross axis runs perpendicular to the main axis. We also looked at flex direction, flex wrap, and flex properties. So the properties that we covered for flex properties were flex grow. The flex grow property specifies how much the item will grow relative to the rest of the flexible items inside of the same container. The flex shrink property specifies how the item will shrink relative to the rest of the flexible items inside of the same container. And for the flex basis property specifies the initial length of a flexible item. And for flex shorthand, the flex shorthand property sets how a flexible item will grow and shrink to fit the space available in this flex container. And then we covered alignment. So we can use align items, and these align along the cross axis. We can align to self. And then we can use justify content. And justify content we can use to align along the main axis, space around or space in between the content, or at flex start and flex end. And then we look at align content. So aligning when there's extra space in the cross axis. We can align items versus align content. All right. That's where we're going to stop. We'll come back and we'll continue working on Flexbox. Cool?
Yeah.
Any questions?
No.
All right, cool.